Hey there, cats and kitties. I am the Blues Man, Johnny Blues. And with this video, we're discussing my thoughts on episode 8 of the anime series, Sakurada Reset. And this was definitely an interesting way to wrap up the 3-episode arc to deal with the witch and Susanoo and everything like that. I thoroughly loved the opening of this episode, picking up right where we left off with Kei having been, basically sucked into one of Susanoo's photographs as put there by Oka Eri. And he's just kind of like realizing, okay, there's only so much of the picture that's actually come alive, that actually still exists within the photograph, as far as, being transported back to when it was originally taken. And it really kind of reminded me toward the end of Final Fantasy VIII, when you are playing as Squall and sort of the FMV video ending to the game starts playing, and he finds himself in a distant, sort of nothingness where it's just clouds all around him, surrounding him and everything. And he's just walking and walking and walking. You get the sense that he's been walking for like days and weeks, and he's so exhausted he collapses by the end of it in frustration, in hopelessness, because he's lost to this strange void. And that's kind of what this reminded me of. That's the visual that, this episode opens with that really harkened that back to me. Only it's much less melodramatic in the case of the episode, where Kei just sort of reaches his hand out into those clouds, and he's transported right back out of the photograph again. And, of course, as he sets to chase after Oka Eri, he finds one of the doors locked and everything. And I'm like, oh, man, all hope is lost. But here is Kei once again showing just how much of a strategist he is. He's not going to walk into a scenario without pre-planning, without already gauging all the possibilities and accounting for them. In this case, giving very much Haruki this recorded, playback of his voice to keep her memories solid, so that she wouldn't be able to be so easily manipulated when Oka Eri tries to implant in her mind that, hey, we've been friends for a very long time. She wants to manipulate Haruki and break she and Kei apart and everything like that, and it absolutely falls flat. It fails. Because, of course, Kei has already predicted this as a possibility. And he's even got Marase there to be sort of the cavalry through the wall rather than over the hill to grab onto Oka Eri and buy Haruki time to go and try to catch up to Kei and everything. And as we see by that point, Oka Eri's gone home. She's given up for all intents and purposes for the time being in any case. And Marase and Haruki both go and find Kei. That opening was brilliant. I loved it. And I loved, for the most part, the majority of the rest of the story, even though there was, again, some wonkiness in the pacing and the plotting and the doling out of the use of these abilities. And I just, I was left by the end thinking, I was really happy with the sort of other leg dropping, this idea of this very romantic, through nostalgic, rose-colored lenses aspect of all this has been about from the get-go, was the witch seeking to reunite with her boyfriend Susanoo. They'd known each other since childhood. And so to think of all the love that they had between each other and how much of a hardship it was, especially with the Bureau becoming involved and clasping down on the witch and everything like that, to break them apart, to keep them apart. All she wished, knowing that she had only limited time left for her life, was to reunite with him. And she called back, they both recollected really, on this story that we see in this episode about the witch who, rode her witch's broom up to the window of her lover and surprised him. And that's kind of where we end it. And for all of that romanticism, I loved it. I really loved it. I was really just smitten with that whole concept, that hopeless romantic concept. And here is that romance, burgeoning anew for what limited time these characters have left to each other. To see Kei and Haruki and Marase, as well as getting Susanoo involved, to see how they would strategize, how they would outdo Oka Eri's original plan of sneaking the witch out, which would have created so many more problems. And they streamlined it all. They made it possible for the witch to actually legitimately escape with no one to blame. And there's no one they can point the finger at, because none of the people who were involved, there were resets that undid all of that, but left everything stabilized so she could still escape, with no one being the cause or the reasoning, as I say. And it was just pitched perfect. It was beautiful. I loved it. I loved that sort of, you see the witch's hand going up to knock on Susanoo's window, very much as the story ends with the witch knocking on the window of her lover. And they let you hear the knock. They fade out, but they let you hear the knock. And then, of course, they're calling back on all of the dialogue going on between the witch and Kay, because he's so curious as to, all through this episode, what this was all about. At one point, he actually calls out the fact that Susanoo has been lying about his abilities. They're in cahoots. Susanoo and the witch, in one way or another, are in cahoots, and what does that all mean? And he pieces it all together by the end, and he realizes how much of a great sense of importance there is in coming to the rescue of the witch, of bringing them back together. And there is no nefarious purpose, really. It's just the manipulations of these two desperate lovers who wanted to see each other again at the foundation. And you can say what you will about Oka Eddie. I do not believe this is the last we've ever seen of her. But she, even though she has been beaten time and again by the end of this episode, she's still not given up. She still wants at Kay. And, it's one of those things where by the end of it all, I was for the most part satisfied by this episode. But I had a sort of distancing from it where I could kind of look at it a little more objectively, and for whatever reason, for my part, I just felt a little more dissatisfied than I would have hoped. And it wasn't for the way this particular arc ended. I think it had to do with a lot more of the muddling of all the grander story arc aspects, Oka Eddie's involvement, knowing that there is going to be further involvement with her down the line probably, and this whole scenario really didn't need to take 3 episodes to get to this, summation, to get to its conclusion. I feel like they really stretched it out, and they really muddled it with a lot of, hither and thither mystery that really didn't amount to a whole hell of a lot. I think through each of the previous 2 episodes, I was saying they are somehow in cahoots. What are they on about? I was speculating maybe there was a grander, more, malicious, nefarious purpose, but... And then the aspect of Oka Eddie, I had speculated what was her involvement. Was she working with them? Well, she was. She was working with them, but unbeknownst to herself, apparently, or at least with limited knowledge as to how exactly, it all comes down to the manipulation. Going all the way back to Kay's childhood, what led him to Sakurada in the first place, what secured him going there in the first place was the witch's manipulation, her being able to see the future. And it's just, I just feel like there's so much of this stuff that they stretched it out, they muddled it, they made it much more mysterious than it actually needed to be. Than it actually was. Some of my speculations were perfectly directed in the right direction, and there was just so much more supplemental material going on that just, it just mixed up and muddled the through line. So that by the end, while I was satisfied and I was happy to see the witch and Susanoo reunited, I was happy to see they had won out over the Bureau in a manner that would not endanger any of the other, power wielders or anything like that, ability users. That all made me happy, but I was just kind of like, why did we need all this other garbage to get to this point? 2 episodes would have done it, man. Instead of 3, instead of really stretching it out and adding all of this other nonsense that just kind of went nowhere. You could say it was playing into the reset ability and whatever like that, but I mean, Kay is pretty much 3 steps ahead of the game in most scenarios, or if he isn't, he'll get there by the end of a given day because of the reset. He'll figure it out. He'll piece it together. He's a moving thinker, he doesn't need to go and hypothesize and sit by his lonesome and figure it out that way. He can piece it together in motion as it's happening. And we've seen this time and again. This is why he snapped Marase back a couple of pegs. That's why he beat Oka Eddie a few times in this episode. So it just feels like the momentum, they were building up a solid momentum, and then it just sort of petered out by the end. Even though it petered out in the way I most wanted, it didn't have to take so long to get to that point. And I think the most overhanging standout aspect of all of this, after you get past Kei's just savagely ripping Okaedi's plans apart, handing her her ass, being able to predict what she was likeliest to do in her gunning for him and trying to, go after Haruki for that purpose. After you get past this renewed love and romance between the witch and Susanoo, after you get past all of that, is Sumire. We learn through the witch's own words to Kei that she is to have been the living successor, ability user of sensing the future. That is mind-blowing. That is gobsmacking. Because Sumire died, so far as we know. We never saw a body. We saw somebody taking a pitfall off a bridge during a stormy, mountainous scene. We don't know. We were told she died. Well, maybe she probably did. There's probably a given. Unless she was put into some form of hiding by the Bureau or something like that, in a similar fashion to how the witch was. Or perhaps she killed herself because she knew that would be her inevitable future, that they would clamp down on her and hold her in irons for the rest of her life, trying to exploit her future sensing ability. But the thing that really stands out to me about that is I have been, from the get-go, ever since spurned on by a comment from one of you guys in an earlier episode, I've been working off this idea that there were some unseen manipulative hands, perhaps even time-traveling hands, not just reset ability, not just sensing the future, but people who could physically go back and manipulate the past. And I was even looking at the windows through which Susanoo's photographs gave us, these portraits of the past. Could the past be manipulated therein? Doesn't seem to be the case at all whatsoever, but it left me with the very sort of outstanding idea that someone, in some manner, was exploiting scenarios, and that is what led to Sumire's death. But it seems there are no such manipulative hands going back in tandem with that, apart from Sumire's own. And the question that then remains is, how far and wide do the ramifications and reachings of her future sensation ability, how far does that go? Presumably, if she did take her own life, was that as a result of an insurmountable, unalterable future where she would have been clasped in irons and taken to be exploited in a similar fashion to how the witch was? Was she only trying to escape that destiny? Or perhaps, did she see wider? Did she know more? Did she know more about possible futures? The possibilities, the probabilities, and could she work more outside the box? It really remains to be seen, and it really has me highly intrigued and curious, because, of course, the witch answers my very own speculation, my damn near certainty that I've made vocal in the past couple of videos. We are not done with Sumire. We will see her again. Whether that is confined and limited to only that photograph of Susanoo's or not, or whether or not she's still out there living and breathing in the world, whether she's been, in hiding or whatever like that, whether her death was a fake out and a cover-up by the Bureau, by her own hands, by her hands working with other people, all remains to be seen, but we know for a certainty she is not taken out of the story wholeheartedly. She still has something left to do. Now, in a perfect world, I'd love to see Sumire's life being saved if it wasn't a fake out to begin with, and she isn't actually still out there somewhere. If she had actually died, I would very much like to see some means of going back and bringing her out of it again. Making it so that she didn't need to kill herself. Whatever the case, it seems like if you go back to the phone call in the previous episode with Okaedi, someone working in the Bureau is not to be entirely trusted. In the way, shape, form, manner they encapsulated the witch and exploited her ability, in the way that one guy, that thuggy guy, when they're going in and getting, Susanoo to take pictures of the place that will eventually lead to the witch's escape, the guy says, no, any ability users coming against us, we're holding a grudge. We're coming after you. and such like that. The Bureau is not to be entirely trusted, and not everybody working with it is on the same page of goodness and righteousness and doing the good things and the right things as Kei and Haruki are, and whatever like that. So there is a threat. There is some malevolent, nefarious force, and it is the Bureau, or it's persons within it. And again, just at the end of the day, it didn't need to be this muddled. It could have been much more straightforward. It could have been 2 episodes whole to dole out the entirety of this story with the witch and Sasano. And so while I really enjoyed those aspects of the story, seeing Kei again snap Oka Eddie back a few pegs and everything, and beat her in the manner with which he did, strategizing 3 steps ahead of the game of what she would potentially do, that was great, but it just feels like it took much longer than it needed to get to that fruition. And so it was enjoyable, but it was also a little meh in the end. Love to hear from you guys what you thought of this particular episode of Sakurada Reset, if you've seen it as well, and whether or not you agree with me, whether or not you found it much more satisfying or dissatisfying. Anything goes, love it or hate it. Just love having that conversation. And yeah, otherwise it'll be pretty much it for me on this. Hope this video finds you well, and I'll catch you all later. Peace.